Quick. Okay, here we are. So we are live. Very good. Welcome everyone. Another Thursday, another show where we talk about, and we already talk. So we had to stop ourselves to click the live to click the live button, and I brought some stuff like immediately to where we would go next. So again, so we use this time, hopefully with everyone here, to talk about the interesting thing is like, okay, we have data, we have business, we have product, why they all let's naturally work together. And I don't do this alone. So I have really, two nice guests here. And so, hello, everyone. And so maybe let's start. So Roy, do you like to introduce yourself quickly? Sure, and then I would hand it over to Ahmed.
Yeah, no problem. So my name is Roy Hasson. I'm the head of product at Upsolver. Been around the block a while, doing a lot of data stuff at AWS. You can find me on LinkedIn as well.
That was really quick. Yeah.
Yeah, you said quick, so I went quick. You can go a long way. It's okay.
Awesome.
Hello, I'm Ahmed. I'm founder and CEO of Narrator. We're an end-to-end data platform on top of the activity schema, making it really easy to answer questions really fast.
Perfect. So I was planning 5 minutes for this, so but it's awesome. No, it's really great. So I want to start with, let's say, really like some quick things, and one thing. Let's see what you come up with, because like I just got the idea just before we were started. So when you look back, so we're basically at half of 23, unfortunately. So but still, so a lot of stuff has happened as always in data. So if you have to name one thing that happened to data, or that you saw, some product, some, I don't know, a concept or so on, that really surprised you or made you excited or really disappointed you. So something that at least like kept you emotionally in a very, very high state. So do you have an idea? So I don't know, Roy, do you have an idea what it was?
Yeah, so I'll go with something that's a bit more recent, but I feel, and I talked about it before on, LinkedIn and other places, but I think the announcement from Snowflake on the Snowpark container service, that's a game changer. I mean, there's a lot of Gen AI, LLM stuff. It's cool. Like, I don't think it's really a game changer, but this container service, initially when I looked at it, I kind of said, like, this is a bad idea. Like, why would anybody want this? Running compute on top of Snowflake, that just doesn't make any sense. But kind of start thinking about it more and more and talking to people, like, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, if you think about it, if you fast forward, 2-3 years from now, Snowflake is basically replacing that distributed cross-cloud storage layer and compute layer, right? And the focus is that your data can live really anywhere, and anyone who wants to access it in whichever way can do it through the Snowflake platform. So that ubiquitous, data cloud environment makes a ton of sense, and be able to bring compute workloads on top of that data, just like we have, compute workloads today running on, accessing MySQL and Postgres. It's the same thing on top of Snowflake. And then you kind of look at how companies are starting to use data sharing within Snowflake. So if you're two customers of Snowflake, you can simply share data through their platform. You don't have to copy it out. It's all the same access controls, encryption, everything is kind of built in for you. I think it's a real game changer. Like, I think in the next couple of years, like, we're really going to see that become bigger and bigger, and more workloads that we never imagined running on top of Snowflake will start running on top of Snowflake, instead of independent Kubernetes clusters trying to access Snowflake in a bunch of different ways, or copying data into S3 or GCS. So for me, I think that's a big game changer in 2023. But we're only going to see the effect probably in the next couple of years, once people kind of figure out what to do with it.
Okay, that's good. You're not basically the second person who said that to me. So
just wait. You'll see more of it. And I have no stake in it, so I'm not invested in any way. But I really think from a technology perspective, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Ahmed, what was your thing?
I will actually pick something that's negative, which is like something that keeps me up at night. I would say the rise of CI/CD for data. I think it's actually a really bad thing for the data industry. I think we are getting into a habit where data is getting so much more complicated and complex that we are spending, I used to call this thing like the potential energy of data is so high and the kinetic energy of data is so low. Like, and adding more and more data engineering and more analytics engineering and more CD to like track everything and connect these two pieces and ensure that your DBT and your like metrics layer and your looker and your looker's cache, all these things are syncing, is just really a sign of a problem and less of a solution. And the more tools you have to use, the more that data will have a harder time proving to the business its ROI. Because I do think that this first half year, I've never seen more companies fire more data people than this half. And everyone tells me the same thing. When I talk to executives, they're always saying, they're like, it's just hard to justify the cost. We're spending this much money on Snowflake, this much money on Fivetran, this much money on this team, this much money on this dashboard, into which is another 100K, another 100K here, another 100K here. I have 6 data engineers building the pipeline. I have another one to manage it, and then anomaly detection, so I can just fucking get a number that's correct on my dashboard. I only look at 2 dashboards, and those 2 numbers, I'm trying to get them correct, and it takes me this entire thing, and I'm spending a couple $1 million. And I think this, if you know anything about me, my whole philosophy is like, data doesn't have to be as complicated. We complicate it because of poor data modeling, and the rise of like those layers and layers and layers of things is because data is getting so complicated up front that managing it has become like a full-time job. And I would be really sad if like we end up getting a like DevOps of data, and like we're seeing more and more it become like software, but it is different because the output of these people is really fuzzy. And that's kind of the last thing I'll say, which is there's a lot of jobs in data where the output, like I don't see any other role in the company where the output that goes into another input is as weird as I think the data engineering data setup to the data analyst. Like every data analyst hates the data engineers and hates the people. That's why they start using other tools. That's why product analytics is getting more popular. All these things come up, and they're like, these people are giving me tables that I can't use, and you see this all the time. Yet the data engineers achieving their job because they're building tables, and they never even know what they're going to be used to answer. So I see this humongous system getting more and more complex, and a bunch of companies trying to be like, okay, this is getting to be a shit show. Let's sidestep it. And this shit show continues to add more and more tools, and it's making it more and more complicated, which for me is going to really hurt the industry that is trying to make decisions.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you generally that we're overcomplicating the world of data. But I do disagree a little bit that the need for CI/CD or some form of integration and testing is important in data, just because the role of data just becomes more critical, and it's no longer just a metric on the dashboard. It feeds machine learning, it feeds AI. If that stuff is wrong in some way, right, that can lead to a lot of big problems. Like if you're making, suggestion for like insurance policies for people and there's bad data in there, that's a big problem, right? So like you need to have some kind of process. I think the problem that we have is that, as a data industry, we're fairly immature, and there's lots of other industries around us like software engineering and DevOps and things that have been around longer and have built processes, and we're sort of blindly taking these processes and applying them to data. So it's so easy to just stand up and say like, look, data engineering is engineering, so just like software engineering, so let's take what they're doing and apply it over here just blindly, and that's it. I don't think that's the right way to do it. Now, testing is important, integration is important, like all these things are important, but you gotta apply it to data, right? I don't just pick a random pair of pants from the shelf and put it on. I gotta fit it to me, right? We gotta do that, and we really haven't done enough. And I think a lot of the community is just kind of keep pushing these generic best practices on the industry, and most people don't ask enough questions and don't try to apply it to them and to their use, and then just taking these things blindly, and that does create just lots of complexity and lots of just chaos.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, so I actually think that like when I think about what you're saying is like, yes, some of these things are incredible. Like in terms of like I do think that you should take the raw data and it should be you should back check that their source is giving you the data that you need. And you should just like you would do with a unit test, and you should also look at like an entire like kind of end-to-end test where like you're kind of clicking around, which is the output. That is good. I'm for that. We have a lot of insurance companies that use Narrator. They set up tests on their activities coming in, and they set up tests on the final results that they make out. The challenge is when we start looking at the intermediate layers and treating them like unit tests. And then we have like 1,000 things. So you have like 5 core, like I say this all the time, when people transfer from DBT to Narrator, there's not that many concepts in your business. Your business has like 20, 30 concepts, but we call them activities in there. That's it. But yet your DBT instance has 1,000 tables, 500 tables, 800 tables. So, well, there's 5 core concepts and then 497 combinations of them. And when you treat every combination to have a unit test and input output, and you want to make sure this whole pipeline works, now you're getting into a really dangerous place because, again, like all these steps in between, like from your input and output is getting so large and so much stuff is happening that you end up, maintenance becomes more of a cost than actual quality. And that's what you want to avoid. Like, so that's kind of the thing that I want to be like. I want us to have best practice with like, make sure the data coming in is good. I want us to make sure the output is good. It's just that this whole pipeline, the more we invest in this like Mercury 10,000 table middle area where you have dependencies and alerts and things and waiting 24 hours for your data to sync and all the tables sound the same and all the columns sound the same, but you have a dictionary that tells you what those columns are. That to me is, any time we invest companies, and this is what you're seeing in the beginning of the year, it's getting so complicated, and the solution is to replace it, not to add more CI, CDC on top of that,
but
more learning and more management.
The point you're making is extremely valid, but it's not necessarily a problem of adding CI, CD or more processes. It's a problem of bad pipeline design. Like if you step back and you say like, do you need 10 steps in the middle of this? Or can we just like completely demolish this and start from the beginning? Because if I'm taking, I don't know Narrator well enough, but if I'm taking like DBT models and translating to Narrator, maybe I can go from 10 models to 1 model, right? Maybe that redesign is really what I need. I may still need some testing and integration because the Narrator process still needs to be validated. But, you know, I think what you're seeing is just people taking craft from another place and try to migrate it over to another without really thinking about, do I redesign this? Right? I've seen this when I was at AWS, like working a lot with Spark users, when they simply took old Hadoop, MapReduce, even Apache Pig code and ported it line by line to Spark. Hundreds of lines of code, and like, this thing doesn't work. I need to test it. I need to make sure I got units for everything. Like, stop, like take a step back, get rid of all this MapReduce nonsense, and we can dumb it down to, you know, few lines of code that's much easier to maintain. Maybe you still need testing, but maybe you don't because it's a lot easier to maintain and understand it. But it's, you know, it's avoiding that extra work of you know, doing things the right way sometimes.
I really would like to, because like let's say the design part is really interesting, because like you both come back to this, and myself come back to this as well. So that I often tell people, okay, we have a problem. So basically, Ahmed, as you just said, so like if we keep our head underwater and always like trying to do stuff there, it's sometimes a good point to maybe put the head out of the water and look on the whole thing, and then really figure out what's this. So what our approach is, or let's say some ideas to make it, first of all, to make it aware, to raise awareness to, maybe design is really like, it's an important step, and it's not like a one-time step that you do in the beginning where you do some kind of thing, but it's an ongoing task. So you always have to, this point in time where you should take a step back and see, okay, is our design actually helping us, or is it creating problems? So what our approach is to, first of all, to handle this or to implement these kind of processes and to get better with that. I mean, when I talk to people, they say, yeah, but I have no idea how to design it. So it's, just go along and figure out. And so what are good ways to learn, let's say, to make better design?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this. When I used to like do algorithms for missile defense, I used to do a lot of AI algorithms. And the way that we think about like any sort of system design, we think about it in 2 ways. We say, first of all, the goal. So the goal for us was always like in data is answer questions fast, answer questions accurately. Simple. And then what I would do is like, so the input is a question, the output is an answer. That's the input output. And I do this with a lot of our customers as well. We say, great, let's come up with a list of 30 questions you want to answer. Okay, and let's choose 10 of them. So I'm going to hide 20 and choose 10 of them. And I'm going to say, let's plan a system that can answer these 10 questions really efficiently. And let's see how long let's say after we build the system, how long does it take us to answer these 10 questions? Then let's grab the next 20 questions and use that as a test set. Not testing for the 10 questions, but now, does this system allow me to answer the next 20 questions at the same exact speed as it answered the 10 questions? This is when, like in machine learning, it's called overtraining. If you are really good at answering the 10 questions with your system, but any new questions you can't, then your system is overtrained to the 10 questions. That's kind of what I want us to focus on. And I think we forget that a lot. So as you're designing, what I would always recommend is start with the real input. The input is not what does your data look like and what is the perfect model and no. The input is real questions that people have to answer. And you sample that, like split it into like, I don't know, a couple folds, design your system, imagine how the system would answer those questions. You can imagine tables, you can write the SQL for it, then say, given my new questions, and do it. And that's kind of the key. And this is kind of like the thing that I always preach at a Narrator. The reason why I'm always like, ask me anything is because the point of designing a correct model is so that I can take up any live question. No matter what the new question is, I can answer the Narrator in 10 minutes. That is the point of a well-designed system, is that any new question, not the current question, the new question. And people say, well, we're not going to have new questions. And then I'm like, okay, stop dreaming. You'll always have a billion new questions.
always will. Yeah.
It's 80-20 rule is just such bullshit. We're going to answer, this is going to answer 80% of the questions. And you're like, yeah, but like the 20% is actually like a billion questions.
Yeah, we're all prompt engineers, so you only need one question.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the key way to evaluate it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, I'll take a opposite side of that. I mean, I spent a ton of time with lots of different people at AWS too, like designing and building like basically data platforms, data lakes based, data warehouse based, a whole bunch. And you know what Ahmed said is exactly right. You know, you typically start from like what use cases you wanna solve, right? That's the easy question. You know, what problem we're trying to solve? Like, what does that use case look like? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? You also look at kind of like what are the parameters of that use case? Like how much data is coming in? What type of data is it? Do you expect it to go up? Do you expect it to stay consistent, right? How are you going to use that data when it comes out the other end, right? Is it just going to a dashboard? Do you have your application team going to call some APIs to pull it? Like what's the latency requirements? So there's a bunch of these things and you kind of try to hone it around, you know, one or two primary use cases. But I think the important aspect in that is, you know, like Ahmed said, like you start with maybe two or five questions, but you list 20, right? Get as many as you can out there because you want to design with the future in mind, but you want to start small. What I've seen a lot is like people kind of took that at face value and said, okay, I'm going to pick one use case and build my platform. And then they start building things. And then 2 months later, like, oh, we got to do another use case. Oh, wait, what we chose, this doesn't scale well. It doesn't do this. So I'm going to have to redesign this. And that's where things start to get complicated because nobody wants to redesign. They just want to bolt things on top because it's easier and it's faster. Like, I don't have time for this. I'm just going to take this over here, pour over here because it's better and faster. And I just deal with it later. Right. So like kind of understanding what are the variations of use cases and parameters of them ahead of time as much as you can. I know it's hard, but as much as you can, but actually build for the specific one or two use cases that you need to deliver now will allow you to build small, but also make sure you're designing a platform to scale and to add those additional use cases. And it's easier said than done, I think. But as you start practicing this, you realize that you're designing for scale and you're designing for the overall need of the business. And if somebody comes with some crazy use case, typically your platform can handle it. Maybe there'll be some limitation. Maybe they say, look, it's a 5 million events per second use case, and I only designed for like 1 million events per second. I can deal with that, right? But the rest of the platform can support it, right? So I've seen that being very successful with a lot of different companies of different sizes and shapes.
Yeah. I actually want to add one more thing to it, which is also last thing you said, because you said, like, I think when I hear the word scale, it's another one of those words that also kind of triggers me.
Yeah.
Like 95% of you, everyone watching this, and 95% of companies don't have scale problems. Like, chill. Like, unless you're doing billions and billions of rows a day, like, you're fine in a warehouse. You don't really need real-time analytics. Like, all these things are just like things that you think, like the engineering required to build something that can support like 5 million rows per second is a whole nother problem. You're not there, most likely. If you're still using Fivetran and Snowflake and you have a warehouse, like, you're probably not there, honestly.
If you're using Fivetran, you don't have a scale problem.
Yeah, you're definitely not there yet. So don't worry too much about it. Also, like, this whole idea of latency and everything needs to be super efficient and fast. Like, be understanding of that, the fact that the data coming from Fivetran is like 30 minutes delayed, and then your data on your materialized view is another 30 minutes to an hour delayed, and then the user who's looking at it has a cache that's another 30 minutes or an hour. So, like, just be aware of what you're actually doing and don't put these hard requirements, and just realize what requirements sounds good and what requirements are actually you have to enforce.
Yeah, I mean, that's understanding the parameters of your problem. Like, what's your use case? If your use case is dashboards, none of this stuff really matters, right? Like, you don't need to build Flink and Kafka and everything. But, I'll give you an example. Like, we have one customer that sort of made a decision that all their systems publish data into Kafka, just single interface into the data platform through Kafka. Whether you like it or not, whether it's a good idea or not, it doesn't really matter. That's kind of the decision. They sort of settled on Kafka as the way to do it. So now you may get topics with, a single event a second. You may get topic with 1,000 events a second. Your ingestion platform needs to handle that. Now, Fivetran is not for that. They're not for that. They're for, like, small scale business data. But, a tool like Upsolver, for example, can actually take that and can handle that. So if you have, 1 event a second coming in, and a topic with 1,000 events a second or 1 million events a second, we can handle that. So that scale actually does matter, because in this particular situation, that company, what they're doing is they're saying, like, look, we're going to basically have a self-service ingestion platform using Upsolver, and their data producers can just basically publish stuff into topics and then configure them in Upsolver to read those topics. So we have to scale to that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, scale is always used as an excuse. That's never going to scale. That's never going to work. That scale is not there. A lot of companies don't have the scale, especially for analytics. We talk about CDC, talk about things like that. That's not a big deal. But if you have a platform where you're loading data into a lake, for example, and then from there you bring it into Snowflake for analytics, but that lake is used to do other things with it, then scale may matter, right? Latency may matter. So again, understanding the use case and the properties and the requirements of it and matching it. But like you said, most of the time starting with a platform that can do 5 million events a second is completely unnecessary, unless you're an ad tech or some gaming. But many times scale isn't a big deal, but it does catch up with you. I mean, not to get on a soapbox here, but we hear a lot from customers who are using Fivetran, for example. They started small and scale wasn't a problem. Now they're trying to add more data to it. Their databases are bigger. They're pushing more tables. Scale becomes a problem, right? Doesn't scale. The cost is completely unacceptable and they can't support it, right? So now you have to make the canality decision whether to swap it or not, or deal with the pain, right? And that's where things start to get more complicated, because you may swap it with something else, or you may bolt something on top of that, right? Say, for these big tables, I'm going to use a different tool, and the rest I'm going to use Fivetran, or replace it completely with one tool that can do all of it at scale.
But here comes now the interesting thing. So, like, I guess when the company has someone like both of you, so like you're handling these kind of things, because what you already was describing was like, okay, you have to understand a lot about the business context. So you have to understand, let's say, a lot about the other technology context. So, like, for example, how the application engineers are doing things, how the setters are working. So, and this is just, let's say, maybe 30% of the picture. There might be even more that you need to know. So if you are not a person who has this kind of background who saw this stuff in some degree somewhere already, and so that it already has some kind of checklist in your head where you can say, okay, I definitely have to talk to this kind of person. I have to talk to this kind of team to at least like have a good solid foundation to make a decision. So how do you approach that if you're not this kind of person, but you're sitting in this kind of, let's say you sit in this kind of startup, they raised some money, and now they're basically okay. They have product market fit. They want to grow. So in the end, like, no, everything will really move fast, and you as the data person has to move at the same kind of speed. And I talk to many of people who are in this kind of position. They're really struggling to get this done. So because like for them, it's not so easy to work in this kind of speed. Like for example, the growth and marketing team does, because like growth and marketing team goes on, goes out, shops a new software, goes on that, or even have that and go along. So
is the challenge here? Sorry, just to kind of ask clarify question on here. Is the challenge the pace of change around them, like being able to kind of keep up with their requests, or
true the pace of change, but on the other hand, keep the stuff in the back of the head that we just talked about, like the design things, or like Ahmed's case, to say, okay, we have this let's say 10 cases that work, but I still have to have these 20 cases that maybe become relevant in the future, so I have to test again. So these, on the one hand, react to a lot of fast changes, but on the other hand, keep everything together that you then will basically drive the thing against the next wall.
Yeah. Ahmed, do you want to take it?
Yeah, so I have like two policies on this thing, which is one, just when you ask ask your people questions, the questions don't change as often as you think. Like, I think that people are still like, they're doing more of similar things. Again, like, just there's not that much in the world. There's not that much uniqueness. Like, yes, the marketing team for a company is doing $1 billion and a company doing 100,000 are trying to really do relatively same things, maybe with more moving pieces. So I would say, again, this is for the analytics use case, keep that in mind of what you need. And I would say plan the tool set and the architecture you're doing to be replaceable. Like, I think that like one of the things that we get a lot, like from our users, is we've helped many users switch from Fivetran to Snowflake. From Redshift to Snowflake, and from Snowflake back to BigQuery without anyone noticing. Like, it is, you don't need to like be so vendor locked into one thing. Even Narrator itself, we make all our queries shareable, and we literally you can, if you want to stop using Narrator, you can take everything we do and put it in dbt, and we give you open source packages to do it for you. So like, you don't have to use our product if you don't want to. Like, I think thinking about the world as like, okay, there will be a new dashboarding tool, there will be a new UI tool, there will be a new, you might start with Fivetran because they gave you like a free, like Mozart is a great example. You start with Mozart or any of these tools that are like, hey, we got it in a box for you. Here's a warehouse, here's Fivetran, we'll just charge you a lot of money. That seems great. But like, very quickly, these things become very expensive, and you want to be able to switch. If you're like dealing with $5 million a row and you have Fivetran, you're bankrupt. So you should definitely switch to like an Upsolver or something that is way more cost effective. Like, but you don't want to limit yourself. If your whole pipeline is based, so many layers are based on Fivetran's data model, and now you're like, want to switch to Upsolver. Well, that project's now a 2-year project, and now you're like, fuck, I don't want to do it. So how do you design? If you read the book Anti-Fragile by Nassam Taleb, you talk about building systems that grow with chaos. And when you think about your system, you think about it like, you are going to have chaos. You are going to want to change your mind. You should be able to. How do you allow change without being it so risky? And I think that's like, again, I care a lot about data modeling and design, because everything is easier when you have one table. I promise you that. If you have 1,000 tables, like, there's 1,000 moving pieces. If you have one table, it's one moving piece. But that allows you to move from Redshift to Snowflake, and then switch from Fivetran to Upsolver, and you only can correct things as you go. Switch from Looker to Tableau. You don't really need to do it. And I think that if you look at your system and you think that your system is going to live forever, you've misunderstood. So I think anyone designing, I would say, assume that your system is going to be refactored in 2 years, because any company you talk to has refactored their system every 2 years, and ask themselves, what would it take for me to refactor it?
Right.
And not what would it take me now. What would it take to me after all my chaos has been added, after all the data I have? So you might not. You might keep the system for 10 years. Who cares? That's awesome then. You build a really good system. But like this, every vendor is incentivized to lock you in. Like, so they are doing things to lock you in. So you should be very aware of what, and if you ever have questions, email me and I'll tell you every single thing every vendor is doing to lock you in, including what we're doing too. Like, everyone is doing that to lock you in. So you got to be prepared, because you don't want to be locked in, because there will be better tools, there will be cheaper tools, and your use case might change.
So I love everything you said. I mean, I'm 100% in agreement with what you said. Again, even if you look at it from a use case perspective, right? there really isn't a lot of uniqueness, right? The core use case is very, very similar. Ultimately, what you do with the data and how you use it may be different, but what you need to build to deliver that data is most likely the same, right? Some things change, scale change, volume change, some adjustment and transformations and stuff, but that's minor things. I think the use case for the most part scales, is the same. The other kind of more, I guess, practical points is that in addition to planning for chaos and planning for change, modularity, like building a modular platform, is extremely important, right? It's very easy to say, you know what, I'm just going to jump on the Snowflake bandwagon, put everything in Snowflake, done deal. Okay, cool, that's fine. There's companies that want to put all the eggs in that basket. They're happy with it. They've done that with Oracle for 30 years. Eventually they hit the wall. When Oracle start, costing a lot of money, they hit the wall and then they had to migrate. But the migration was very costly. It took a long time, but it was 30 years. They were happy. They spent 2 years migrating. Now they're going to be happy for another 30 years. That's okay for them, right? But if you think about kind of what Ahmed said, is that building something, an architecture that's modular, you can easily swap these components where it makes sense. Now, the other aspect of building a modular architecture is understanding where the logic and the code is going to live, right? Like, for example, if you're going to start with Fivetran as your data ingestion, if it's simply doing extract and load like a dumb pipe, you can buy Fivetran and you can just in 2 minutes replace it with Upsolver and you don't have to do anything. Now, if you put logic there, right, and you say like, I have data models inside of Fivetran, now it's much harder, right? But if you move your models, let's say, onto a platform like Narrator or even dbt, now it's a single place where the logic lives. And yes, there'll be some work to fix it, but it's one place to live, one place for you to go focus your effort. I see this a lot with companies who invest in Tableau and Power BI, where a lot of their business logic actually lives in Power BI because they make it that way. They make that's the lock-in, right? That's the lock-in that they say. They put that logic there. Now, if you want to move away from Power BI, good luck, because you get logic all over the place. Different people have different Power BI and different logics everywhere. It's a total nightmare, right? So you see a pattern where people are like, let's go put that logic inside of Snowflake. And now whether it's Power BI or Tableau or Billy Bob dashboards, doesn't really matter because that logic is there. So modularity and then kind of simplifying and centralizing where the core business logic and code lives will make your life a lot easier. And it's okay to go buy tools. Like, you don't need to go and use the Debezium for ingestion. Like, it's pointless, right? It's too much work, not necessary. It's Fivetran, it's Upsolver, it's whoever you want in that space, because there's no logic there. There's no code there, right? But if you're choosing between dbt, a Narrator, or somebody like that, then that's a little more important, because if you spend a year building 10,000 dbt models, to get out of dbt with those models is going to be hard, right? And of course, there's tools that make it easier to get out of it nowadays. But in my mind, that's kind of how I think about it when we design. And I would kind of live with one point, is that when I worked for AWS, one thing AWS did extremely well is the solution architects. They were fantastic. Like, if you had a question, like, how do I design this system? I have some data coming in, not a big deal, but the retrieval, right? The access, I need low latency. Have that conversation with them, right? Hey, SA, how do I do this? I mean, they'll even answer to you on LinkedIn or on the support forums if you don't have enterprise support. Google has them, Azure has them, Snowflake has them, Databricks has them. Use them. They're really, really good because they see so many companies and so many architectures and so many problems that they can very quickly pinpoint and realize, like, your problem isn't unique. I've seen 15 other people with the same exact problem just this week. So it's valuable to kind of use that resource.
Yeah.
Don't listen to everything you read on LinkedIn.
Yeah, don't read everything. That's a good one. Those are that. One more thing I would like to also say, that's another, like, just quick rule of thumb that I like to do. I like to count my cost multipliers. And what that means is that when I think about, like, data in general, I think about, okay, I'm capturing the data. Okay, so I'm paying for a system to capture it. Okay, then I have to pay for Fivetran per row to move it. Then I have to pay for Snowflake to process that moving. Well, then I need to query that moving. I pay for Snowflake's query. If I have a materialized view that's running every 30 minutes, that's 24 times 2. That's 48 more times I'm paying for every row. So now I'm at like every row I migrate, I'm paying for it maybe a couple hundred times. That's super critical to understand. When we do cost optimization with customers, the biggest cost that they never notice is the fact that if you have any, even at low scale, not even when you get to Upsolver scale, even at low scale, like 1 million rows, and you're trying to keep you want the data accessible every 30 minutes, that's 48 times, 48 million rows every single day that need to be rematerialized so you can get your table. And that's just, again, bad design. But when you keep those kind of quick rule of thumb in mind, as you're thinking about this system, you start realizing, oh, wait a second, this might be really costly in the long term. But yes, right now I have all these credits and I don't care. But like, as I have 1,000 of these tables, each one being multiplied 48 times, 1 million rows for one table. We have a cost calculator that we used to give people to be like, just to understand their cost, but it'll be like 1 million row table materialized every 30 minutes, plus like all the additional things you have to do. Like your compute cost in using the table is nothing compared to the just keeping the data up to date. And that's now in a year, if that becomes 2 million, well, it's not just 2 million, it's 2 million times 48 times 30, because that's how many times that you're processing this thing in the month. So just be aware of that scale thing in the way that like either tools like Upsolver, which are more streaming, are doing incremental, or tools that are more batch based might be more expensive. Just be aware of those little tiny things that are happening, because incremental versus batch means a huge impact.
It makes a big difference. That's a fantastic point. I mean, we see this all the time.
I want to kind of stay in the same space, but I want to do, let's say, kind of an experiment and flip the coin a little bit. So let's take a different kind of position. So let's see, you are the ambitious kind of growth marketer or growth product person or whatever, and you're sitting in this yeah, exactly. So these guys are really motivated. So and you're sitting there and you basically work with the data team who cannot deliver the stuff that you need. So you have your list of 10 questions. So you think they're straightforward. You should get an answer to that. So what can you do to basically work with the data team to get what you want without, let's say, complaining to other people, or go out there and shop your own products, which usually most of the time happens. So what are good approaches to do that?
Okay, so I'll
go ahead and kick it off.
I'll kick it off. Well, so there's like, this is a great question, because I think every marketer who has ever existed has had this feeling, and there's possible ways. Way one, like you said, go find another tool and try to bypass it. And this is doomed. Do not do this, because this will result in numbers not matching, and then you're now yelling at the engineers for having data doesn't match the data team, and data team is not matching the product analytics team, and now you're fighting. Like, that's bad marketing. Two, you go to your data team, and your data team is like, well, data's complicated. Data's hard. This has to be done. So the way I would actually approach this problem is to pair with the data team on expectations that you need to do your job. So I think the challenge is, most companies, the data team, when I talk to data teams, I'm like, what are your requirements? They're like, oh, we need to be able to answer one question every 2 weeks. Or like, I need to answer the 10 questions I have every month, or I need to build this one dashboard. Their requirements are never like the output of the data engineering. The data team is not like, they're like, I need to build this one dashboard. It's not to like support the marketing team. So the marketing team is like literally trickling questions to the data team because they want to, like, they don't want to overload data team. That's not the right answer. I think the marketing team should say, here's the 700 questions that I want to ask, right? I want to be able to answer. Or like, here's the 50 questions I want to be able to answer. And here's my perceived next 5 follow-ups for each one of these questions. You give them the requirement and you say, how does the data team now has the full list of requirements, instead of like giving them one question at a time, getting a dashboard, and then what I would call iterating in production. No, give them what you're thinking and what made different pathways. Do the planning of what you might want to know. Give it to your data team. And I think as the data team needs to really be like the biggest failure of all data teams, which I get really angry at teams that do this. Data teams need to set the foundation for the input and output of every one of their teams. If your data analyst has the input, which is tables that can do this, I want data analysts actually be able to analyze the data and answer these questions. So if you give me this table with this kind of like structure, for example, if I'm able to answer this question, I need to be able to do it. I should never have to go back to a data team. Like in software engineering, we call it regression. If a data analyst has to go back to data engineering, that's a regression. And in modern day data teams, that's all regressions. And the data engineer. So when you set the requirements up front as a marketer and you say, this is what I need, and I need this in 2 months, data team is required to operate and say, that is the goal. What are the tools and approaches that we need to use that allows us to hit this goal at the speed that this goal is needed? And then everyone in the team, you break that down similar to OKRs, where this is the input and output of every team. And you want to keep going in one direction. And you want, as the head of data, be very conscientious of backwards. If you're going back to your teams, I draw this diagram somewhere on our website where I'm like, what's the process? They're like, oh, marketing says this. Marketing wants to follow up. Data doesn't have it. Data goes back to data engineering. It goes back to data engineering. Data engineering goes, oh, I have to model the data. That goes to the whole pipeline. It breaks something else. Oh my God, this thing is happening. Well, dashboard is not used. All these things should not be the case. And you should treat it like a pipe. Like you mentioned, Roy said it, like shitty piping. Like you need a good pipe and the pipe should be flowing in one direction, not with a bunch of back holes, and even just being monitoring it. But I do think for a marketer, don't baby your data team. Give them the list of 500 requirements that you need and expect them to answer. And that pressure and that clarity allows the data team to understand their own requirements and what they're building for. Because the worst case scenario is that your data team thinks that their goal is not what you want, what you need. And that is probably very common.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. The way I kind of think about it, I think fundamentally there's a problem with the way that most companies treat their data teams. Again, they treat them almost like as a support function. You know, I got a problem. Here's some dribble of information. Solve this problem for me. The data engineers are kind of like mechanics, right? I show up with my car. The thing is dinging or not going. Fix it for me, and then I'm gone. Like you don't need to know where I'm going. You don't need to know what I'm doing with my car. Just fix the damn thing and let me go, right? But that's not how it should be, right? Not with the mechanic, with data engineers. So like I you should be coming to the data engineer the way I do it, the way we do it at Upsolver, is that they're part of our team, right? They're engineers. They're part of the company. They want us to be successful. So it's just like, I approach my engineers when I want to build a new feature or build a new product. I come to them with a spec. Like, this is my strategy. This is kind of where I'm going, the decisions I'm making, why I want to go that way. Here is, a set of requirements. Here's some customer feedback, the user stories, why we want to do this, how we want to do this, what it needs to look like from an end consumer perspective, right? Just like Ahmed said, like, here's the use case, here's the user story. This is what I want the output to look like, what it needs to solve. And then I want to work with you together to get to build a solution that allows me to deliver on these things, but also add more to it. So I'm not asking you to give me an answer to a questions I'm asking. I'm asking you to actually give me a platform that I can go and ask my own questions when I'm ready. Right? I'll give you some of the beginning ones, but I'm going to keep asking more later on. So help me build something that is going to scale with me. Right? And I think that's kind of the interaction that's lacking, especially I've seen this with a lot of conversations online and with other people that we work with directly, is that the data team isn't part of the conversation. They're sort of like after the fact. We made a decision, now they're going to deliver on it. But so they can do that, right? But then you're going to get crap. And then you're going to get a bunch of back and forth, like Ahmed said, and, lots of questions. I don't get it. Why not this? I gave you what you wanted. No, you didn't. Those kind of things. Bring them along. Show them the vision, what you're trying to solve and what you're trying to build. Let them be part of the conversation. They know what they're doing, right? So let them be part of the conversation around finding the right solution. And they may come back to you and say, look, you asked for this. I just built this other solution 2 weeks ago for this other team. It looks exactly like what you want, and it works freaking amazing. I just need to push your data through it, and then off you go, and you're on your own. You can do whatever you want, right? But if you don't have that conversation, you're never going to know, right? So, and it's really important to kind of bring them along and making sure that they're the ones who are providing the insights. They're the ones who are saying, like, we're responsible for this platform. I'm not going to build a one-off to answer your question. I'm going to build something that's sustainable, that I can sustain, and you can be more self-service, right? And kind of build your own use cases on top of that data set. Because I don't want to reinvent the wheel every week.
So I agree with everything you're saying. I want to tune two words that I just need to make sure that rules of thumbs. because there's a lot of miscommunication that happens with data teams. I was running a data team. This happened a lot for me. One, the word anything. I want to be able to slice and dice by anything. It should be banned. Like, no. Start with give examples. I want to be able to ask and answer my own questions. Sure. Give me the first 30. Like, and don't give me the first 2. Give me the first 30, because you need a lot of questions. This is going to be the key. It's like, if you're building with a fuzzy output, you're going to build a shitty input. Promise you that. So don't get a fuzzy output. Ask real questions. And yes, there will be more questions that come, but start with like a real foundation. So like, just be conscientious. And again, and here I'm talking about data analytics, not like infrastructure or piping and stuff like that. Like, if you need to process data at a certain speed, like, and there's a scale of data, like that's an engineering/data engineering/core problem. But I'm thinking of like, if you're trying to help a marketing team and they're like, I need to be able to make these decisions, like, it's not that simple. They're like, don't let them say, I'm just trying to optimize spend. Sure. Make money, increase ROI. Sure. That means nothing. Get real series of questions. Ask them, what would you do if this number said 30? What would you do if this number said 50? Try to get a bunch of real examples. Like you mentioned, Roy, user stories. User stories, not users should be able to do anything. No. Get real content, because you would build for real. And I think a lot of time we build for fake. We build for maybe they possibly might want to maybe do it sliced by this, and the actual things. I mean, Timo, our last talk, we talked a lot about product analytics.
Yeah.
Like, the product analytics questions and the BI data questions are fundamentally different. So if you say anything, the data person is often going to imagine BI questions, which are often 90% chance not what you actually want. So be very clear. With
I also want to add like one point of distinction, because we're both saying very similar things, but I'm looking at it from one angle, you're looking at it from a slightly different angle. So I just wanted to kind of make that distinction. Like, what I'm talking about is more from the platform perspective, right? When you're building the infrastructure, you're building the platforms, like, I want to understand those user stories. I want to understand the questions you're going to ask, but ultimately I want to build something that you can be independent and ask more questions later on, right? Where I think you coming at it from, this person who is helping on the data team actually understands the business and understands the problem that this marketing team is trying to solve. Because I'm, as a data engineer, I understand the platform. I may not understand your thing. Like, if you're trying to do some attribution, crazy attribution, like, it's not my thing. I don't really get it. So if you ask me how to solve that question and not answer that question, I may not have the context or the experience to do that. But I can build you a platform. I can build you a solution that puts the data in a place where you can then do it because you're the expert. So I think there's maybe it's a fine line, or like a gray line in the middle.
I'll say it a little differently, which is like, as you imagine the pipeline of people, like, I'm usually dealing with the last end. So like, the marketer is usually being like, hey, like, data team, I heard Narrator could answer my problem, like, check it out. And usually it's like data analysts, people who are using the data. And usually we're like fighting against analytics engineers. That's just like, data's already in the warehouse. It's already loaded. I don't care about any of that stuff. I'm in the state where data is already loaded in one central place, and I'm trying to make sense of it. That's right. And I think Roy's speaking about Roy's customer. I don't think your customer would be the marketing team or the data analyst team. It's the team beforehand, which is like, data analysts, I need to answer this question. And we're like, okay, well, I can't even query that data. And the data is not even coming fast enough for you to make a decision. Like, and then your customer would be like, I don't know whether data engineering is a really fuzzy term because they do a lot of things, but the person who's responsible for the ETL to dump the data into a warehouse, that's your customer. And that person has a duty to give live, accurate data to the data analytics engineer or the data analyst. Right. And that person is the one that is now building a platform to do it. And if you never build your own, please be using something. I really don't think anyone should be building their own custom ETL pipeline.
Unless you have a team of 20-some data engineers, and you
even if you do, like, move them, put them somewhere else. Like,
great idea.
That's true. Yeah,
we can do it on a weekend, so it's no problem. Yeah.
Yeah, but that brings back another maybe a small rule of thumb, right? To Ahmed's point, like, know who you're working with, like, understand their capabilities and their abilities. Like, if you're dealing with a data team that's primarily infrastructure folks, like, they're not going to answer your marketing questions, right? So they may just like say, like, here's the data, you're on your own, do whatever you want. So don't be going to them expecting them to give you answers. right? But if you are dealing with an analyst or analytics engineer who really understand the scope of that problem in the business, they may not understand how to, the pipes, how to deliver stuff. Maybe you don't have a data engineer, you only have an analytics engineer. And that's where, bringing tools like Upsolver and Narrator can help speed that process, get the data in so that analysts can actually focus on their data problem. So just kind of understand who you're working with. Don't ask questions that the person doesn't have the abilities to answer.
Yeah. But at the same time, always give a little context. Like I know Timo and I have a lot of shared opinions on like people, like when you use like Snowplow or like a clean data model versus like Google Analytics 4's like BigQuery data model, you're like, I don't care how fasting this, I don't care how fast Google GA4 is ingesting the data. That data model is so repulsive that the cost of me using it makes me want to shoot myself. So like, just be aware that like, it's not like some of these things, like every layer that adds complexity, you maintain it. So like, I think, I don't know, like some sort of context, but with different requirements.
Good point. So I know it sounds hard, but I want to close with 2 non-data questions. And so they're the quick ones. Yeah. So
what's my favorite movie? Okay.
No. So the movie one maybe do somewhere else. So, but it's, let's say it's in the neighborhood. So what is your best soundtrack when you really have to focus on, let's say, data or product work? So what kind of stuff gets you really deep? I want to have some Spotify or whatever kind of streaming service everyone is using.
I'm going to give you an answer you're not going to like.
Why not?
Silence.
Yeah.
I get too distracted. Like I listen, with audiobook of music, I get distracted. I start singing along or like humming along, and then I get distracted completely. So for me, it's just silence.
That's great.
Just be quiet, leave me alone, don't distract me. I can focus for hours.
Okay, what's yours?
But you can't get that.
I depending on the kind of work, if it's not like too deep thinking, if it's deep thinking, I do like classical piano. If it's like just kind of getting my work done throughout the day, I actually really like international pop music. So I would play like Korean, Indian, like loud, dancey, high energy, but not with the words I don't understand. So I could kind of like
you're not singing along,
and I'm not singing along, and I really, really like that kind of like it keeps me going. I'm just like, yep, gotta do it. But it's like relatively fun.
That's awesome.
That's good. Okay, so final one. What is the best food after a really frustrating data day? What brings the soul up or the mood up again?
For me, it's ice cream.
Oh, good one. Yeah.
I'm a big ice cream fan. Even though I've been trying to cut down on my sugars the last couple of years, you can't live without it. Rum raisin is my favorite.
Wow. Okay, pretty good one. I used to do this thing at when I was at WeWork, and whenever I would have an annoying day, I would go steak for lunch. So I'd go to like Ikari, just get like a nice steak with a little bit of rice, and just like slowly cut my steak and enjoy one bite at a time. And that really just like, I don't know, makes me happy and calms me. So
that's good.
That's good. Thank you very much. That was awesome.
Yeah, this was great. I love the conversation. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, me too. Thanks everyone who was listening, and thanks everyone who's watching this later, because like you can always watch it, and at some point it's also available as a podcast. So if you don't watch, I think you cannot miss it. So I wouldn't watch this without video, but there are some people like silence, some people like just hearing the voices. So I think it's totally
I tend to talk with my hands, so you're gonna miss that part, but
no, yeah, exactly. So you shouldn't miss out. So maybe just see it. Thanks everyone. So I will be back in 2 weeks, and so we have 1 week break in between, and so hopefully see you there.